Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are the two founders of La Union Studio in Seattle, Washington. Director of Design and Culture, Sergio Max Legon-Talamoni, and Director of Creativity, Sonia-Lynn Abenojar. Sergio's work and outreach focuses on creating culturally immersive spaces and places that embody the heart and soul of the community, preserve cultural ecosystems, and celebrate identity. Sergio most recently was appointed as a member of the Governing Council of the Cultural Space Agency, a first-of-its-kind cultural real estate development company chartered by the city of Seattle. Pretty cool, if you ask me. The Governing Council of the Cultural Space Agency is guided by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, leaders from across the cultural, community development, and commercial real estate sectors to help develop cultural space real estate projects that build community wealth through investment opportunities in Seattle. Sergio identifies as a first-generation Samoan Cuban American and grew up in South Seattle. His exposure to a beautiful diversity of cultures helped craft his global human perspective of the world and appreciation for learning through travel, food, and the arts. A visionary force within the realms of design and community engagement, Sonia is dedicated to dismantling barriers within the design process and cultivating profound connections with community partners both locally and globally. In the fields of urban planning and architectural design, Sonia is driven by an unwavering commitment to advancing equity and social justice. Whether in her role as a capital project manager at King County or as a co-founding principal of La Union Studio, she passionately works to infuse these principles into every table where her expertise is welcome. Sonia's journey is a testament to her dedication to creating a world where design not only shapes physical spaces, but also elevates communities and empowers the next generation. This is rare for the show, but today we will highlight two projects, the Baja Bistro and CheBogz, adjacent restaurants located in the Beacon Hill area of Seattle. The beloved family-owned neighborhood institutions, Baja Bistro and CheBogz, reopened in the heart of Beacon Hill after enduring challenges of displacement and the hardships of the pandemic. Today, they sit side by side and once again offer their own traditional and authentic cuisines with vibrant and colorful spaces that reflect their Baja California and Filipino roots. Now, let's get into the details. Sergio and Sonia, welcome to Detailed. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know are busy schedules right after the holidays to join me today. How are you?
We're doing well. Thank you. It's great to be here, and thanks for having us. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. And I love that we're neighbors. You're in Seattle. I'm in Portland. You know, West Coast is the best coast, people. So I'm always happy to have West Coast guests. So we'll just get right down to business. I typically start every episode with an icebreaker question. And it's some random thing that I choose based on either something I read about you or just, what kind of animal would you be, kind of, because I can't think of anything. But your bios kind of triggered this one for me. So beyond our day-to-day work, I think everyone has, let's hope, everyone has some kind of higher calling, something they're passionate about or somewhere they want to make a difference. And one of mine is mentoring and teaching young professionals. So my icebreaker question for the two of you today is, professionally, what is your higher calling?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I can answer it first. My higher calling is to use my creativity to make spaces and places beautiful, and make spaces that are culturally relevant, that people can identify with. So I always knew I was a creative person growing up, arts and crafts. That was like my favorite thing to do. So using architecture and design as a tool, a storytelling tool to make people feel connected to the space.
And for me, I think my higher calling is to really make architecture and design more accessible to the broader public, especially to people and young people that look and talk like me. I really want to inspire the next generation to enter the world of architecture. I personally didn't discover architecture until undergraduate college. And so to maybe expose the next generation or young people to design as a possibility to shape and craft how their neighborhoods grow and how their communities are reflected, I think is something that I am passionate about in the work we do with La Union Studio.
I have to tell you, when I read both your bios, I was extra excited about this interview because I have this big squishy marshmallow heart, and my hashtag is total world domination. I want to make, and I mean that in a way, well, you'll understand that a little more in our last question, but I mean that in a way as, I want to do things all the time that make a better, kinder, more inclusive world. And so I was like, oh, these guys are going to be fun. I'm going to love every minute of this interview. So let's talk about the projects. So we're talking about 2 restaurant tenant improvement projects today. And I forgot to ask you this one before, so you can tell me now how to say it. CheBogz?
You got it.
CheBogz, yeah.
I'm so proud of myself. Filipino food and Baja Bistro, which is Mexican cuisine.
That's correct.
Both in the Beacon Hill area of Seattle, and both businesses are next door to each other. So that's a big thing. Also, both businesses were shuttered or displaced due to rising rents, the pandemic, Seattle's tech boom, among other things. So let's start with that. Let's start with a little background and history on each of these 2 projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So the families of both restaurants have long established roots in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. Both families owned and operated restaurants previous to the openings or the reopenings of these 2 restaurants. And unfortunately, due to, as you mentioned, rising rents and gentrification, and I think COVID was kind of the last straw for Baja Bistro in particular. They weren't able to remain in their current locations. And so it was a bit of a loss for the community because they provided sort of a place for folks to gather and connect within their respective communities. Baja Bistro in particular had a weekly drag show that the queer community in Seattle could, specifically the queer community in Beacon Hill, would gather and congregate there. And so when they closed, it was a huge loss for the community. And we were approached by Angela Castaneda of Beacon Business Alliance. They are a local small business advocacy group, sort of like a chamber of commerce. And they approached us and said, hey, we have 2 clients who would like to remain in the neighborhood. We have a motivated landlord or developer who is interested in carving out commercial space for these 2 tenants. And we really think that you all would be a perfect match to work together to bring them back to the neighborhood and reestablish a footprint in the neighborhoods they've long served. And so we were really excited about the unique opportunity to work on 2 projects simultaneously that both catered to their respective communities, and really, the landlord being sort of integral and pivotal in wanting to highlight them and really celebrate their longevity and their permanence in the community, I think is really just powerful, because it really starts with an opportunity from from decision makers at the higher level, like a developer. And so for someone like that to partner with a local advocacy group and partner with small business owners, I think is a huge win and a huge opportunity. And also the city of Seattle was involved. Recently, they've launched a series of commercial affordability initiatives in Seattle through funding mechanisms and funding packages of different amounts and different kinds. And they were willing to provide and allocate some resources for our two clients. So Oscar Rodriguez, in particular, of Baja Bistro, he came to America from Baja California in 1994, and he launched Baja Bistro with his brother, where they remained for 25 years up until the pandemic. And similarly, the Paraiso family, Patricia of CheBogz, their family came to the Philippines in search of a better life, a better opportunity, and to feed people and to share their culture through food and cuisine, Filipino cuisine. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, they were shuttered in 2017. But then they had shifted to wanting to open a food truck. And so they had owned and operated a food truck from 2017 up until the opportunity came to reopen their brick and mortar. So we were super excited about the opportunity to just work with them and really tell their story. As Sonia mentioned previously, we love highlighting culture and highlighting identity and really creating a space that resonates with folks, not just the clients themselves, but their community that they serve, that they feel like they have a place that they can call their own and really take ownership of.
That is fantastic. I've seen so many businesses just from the pandemic, small family businesses from all kinds of cultural backgrounds disappear in the city of Portland. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, every time I see another one closing, I'm like, no, you love that place. And feeding people is such a backbone of so many different cultures in bringing people together and that community aspect. And so it's heartbreaking to see, a lot of chains. I won't name any names because I don't want to trash anybody. They're fine, but it just takes away so much from a city when businesses like that have to close. So kudos to these groups that are coming together and bringing it back or saving it. I love that.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, working with two clients, doing these two restaurants at the same time. And so in the project description, the one challenge that you mentioned was designing, programming, budgeting, permitting, and executing these two projects at the same time with two separate clients. I know there's a lot of people involved in helping with, the funding and making all of this happen. But at the end of the day, those two clients each have their own restaurants that I'm sure they wanted things a certain way, and juggling both of those at the same time had to be a challenge. So I was going to ask, I was curious what drove the decision to do them both at once, but I think you just answered that for me. So tell me more about because we love how you solved challenges. I don't like to call them problems because every project has challenges. Mm-hmm. How did you manage and align the work with two separate clients and then all of these other groups? She had multiple other groups, both public and private, involved in this as well. Talk to me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so as Sergio mentioned, the opportunity arose when people come together and the visions are aligned across everybody involved. And so, there was about 3,500 square feet of commercial retail space on the ground floor of a residential tower. Originally the building owner wanted 3 tenants. And so we were kind of looking for the third one and trying to find ways that would make it work, financially for the building owner, but also providing an ample room and enough space for our clients to operate their businesses. And so when we did the fit test and the schematic designs of the space, we actually found out that, only 2 businesses would probably work best in the space, because the last third space was like really tiny, and would only be optimal for maybe like a professional services or something really small. And so we were really in the project from the very beginning, advocating for our businesses and our clients to the landlord and saying, it is the right decision to have 2 tenants in the space. And so we were just all on the same page. I think that's what made the project so successful. The building owner, the city, the funders, and the clients, they were all very amendable to the decisions we were making. And so that's why we did everything in parallel. All of the funding was aligned at the same time. And the design and permitting, we all kind of ran it through the gamut at the same time. And we felt by combining the scopes of the construction for both projects that, it would be more attractive to a general contractor to bid on, one ground floor space versus trying to say like, okay, you work on this one and then this contractor works on that one. We were there to decide on the demising walls and the locations where the spaces would get split up. So it was really exciting to be a part of the process that early. Because sometimes we get brought in when the demising walls are already in place, and we're like, why didn't you, shift it this way or a couple of feet that way? And why is there a wall in the middle of a window kind of thing?
Why is the shaft in this location?
Right. And so we were also designing around the grease shafts that existed within the space for the commercial hoods.
Yeah. And just to add additionally, I think it was... there's efficiencies and economies of scale that was afforded by going with one general contractor. As Sonia mentioned, you could control a lot of variables that way when you have one builder under one roof. The challenge was definitely the funding aspect of the projects. Each project really had an array of funding sources. And each of those funding sources had stipulations about what aspects of the project could be used by which funding source. So, for example, by using federal dollars, prevailing wage rates are triggered typically, and you usually see this on large redevelopments or developments, affordable housing projects. You rarely see this on a tenant improvement project. And so to Sonia's point about attracting a builder, typically you're going to, you're going to have a pool of much larger, more costly contractors who may be familiar or have the resources or have the capacity to do all the administration paperwork for a prevailing wage project. And so that was a huge challenge, to find someone who was willing to be flexible enough and cost effective efficiently on the financial side, who was willing to stick and learn through this process with us. I think we went through a series of, I don't know how many bidding exercises or pricing exercises with the one contractor. After just the first one, sometimes the GC could walk away, right? And be disinterested by the sort of level of involvement that's required of them. But this GC in particular, Danny Saya, shout out to Coastal Construction. They were very generous with their time and understood what was at stake, that it's important to foster spaces that celebrates culture and really and how those spaces contribute to the economic vitality and the cultural vitality of a neighborhood. And so by working on that project, I think he understood that, this is what really contributes to the complexity and the beauty of a neighborhood and a community. So it was powerful, to have a team of like-minded individuals and folks that came together to really address a need in the community to retain cultural space in the city.
I have to admit, typically before I do an episode, I look at the pictures first. And I want to kind of just get a feel for the building or the whatever it is I'm doing an interview about, and just kind of make some assumptions from pictures and then read all the project information. So I looked at the pictures of these two spaces. I would not have guessed they were next door to each other. Would not have guessed that. I would not remotely have guessed that the same contractor did both spaces. I got to say, they did a fantastic job of maintaining the individuality. And I did public work for years, so I totally get it about prevailing wages and everything involved in the paperwork, especially when you get up to the federal level.
Right.
It's bad enough at the state level, but you get up to the federal level, and that's a lot to manage. So kudos to your contractor. I mean, right. but what a fantastic way to solve that problem. In finding those economies by having one contractor, one set of equipment, all of those things, instead of who gets to do that with two separate clients.
Right.
Not very many people. Those don't come up very often. So that's amazing. So I understand, you've mentioned both projects receive funding from multiple different sources, some of that being public money, which triggers the prevailing wages. Talk to me in a little more detail about the challenges that were associated with managing that funding and budgeting, and what you learned from that you may take to maybe the next project like this that you do.
Yeah, we learned a lot because we were in it from the beginning. I mean, we learned what a sources and uses document was and how to, understand where your funding sources are, who they are, how much they are, and what you can spend them on. And so we were basically playing this like crossword puzzle of trying to, okay, this money is for construction because, it can pay for the prevailing wages, and it just needs to be for construction. Another pot of money was for furniture, finishes, and equipment. And so we would track that money and budget all the FF&E on that end. And so it was this constant game, an exercise of, looking at our budgets every week, making sure that the clients understood what money that they could spend on, because, a lot of our clients, this is their first big build out for their business. And so we're there to translate some of the information as it relates to the permitting process, the design, the bidding and negotiations, and the award process. So we're really kind of the translators for the technical side of things. And, it worked because we met pretty frequently. I mean, I want to say there was one period of time where we were meeting weekly. It was the funders, it was the city, it was the contractor, it was us, and just going through those exercises of the cost estimating to make sure that everything was in line and fit within each of the buckets, because there was other stipulations where different funders wouldn't release their money until other funders released theirs first. Mm-hmm. And obviously all the funders wanted to see that the budgets were balanced so that we weren't overspending or over allocating different resources to the different aspects of the projects, because there was a lot to manage. And it was, 18 or so months of planning and budgeting and scoping, and, even before the build out started. So everybody was really invested. There was a turnover in city staff. So that was also interesting as well, because you have someone who's an advocate for the projects, for the clients, and then they're like, oh, we're leaving, we're going to do something new, here's this new person. So there's a lot to navigate, but like we started with, everyone had the vision, everyone understood the importance of these two businesses to the neighborhood and the communities, and just the big impact that they make.
And I can't overstate enough how the impact of utilizing federal dollars on a project of this scale. I mean, prevailing wages on a project of this size could increase the budget by 15-20%, and on projects small like this, where every nickel and dime is amplified, right? The decision to utilize certain finishes or fixtures or whatever it is is amplified even more so on a project with a tighter budget and smaller scope and scale. So that was definitely a challenge. And but we did partner. Our clients did partner with a CDFI, a community development funding institution. Think of them more as a small business lender or a bank. They did step in to help provide some bridge funding for construction. And then additionally, the landlord, Tim Abel of Pacific Housing Northwest, he was the developer of the building, the core and shell. He actually put in his TI allowance in first, and that kind of kickstarted the sort of the ball rolling on the funding side. And that money paid for the demising wall and some of the decisions made on a building level. And then once kind of the project started construction independent of each other, that's where some of the public dollars and the private funding from our clients came into play. So as Sonia mentioned, it was a lot to manage, something a little bit, something that we're not usually accustomed to, being invested that intimately into our clients' budgets. But just keeping in mind the sort of longer term vision of wanting to reestablish like two legacy businesses in the neighborhood, I think is something that everyone on the team kind of, made sure of, making sure that they're focused on. And I think that's what helped us get over the finish line.
I've worked on project cost estimates and budgets in the past, and typically for architects that stays fairly broad.
Right.
And I can only see all the benefits of going through this process you're going to have going forward in just thinking outside the box when you're having to solve budget issues and having to find all these solutions and playing that shell game with the money. This has to come in at this point in order for this. Make you really dangerous in a good way.
Right.
That most architects don't get that kind of exposure, that kind of experience to have that to kind of take forward. Doesn't make it any easier.
Right.
But also, you do another project and public money is involved, you're going to know right out of the chute that there are certain things you need to be thinking about early on so that you're not redoing work.
Right.
All kinds of lessons learned on this one.
Right. Well, we're consultants for the City of Seattle Office of Economic Development, in addition to sort of our, day-to-day tasks. And part of our role with being consultants are to help shed light on some of these processes that maybe the city is unaware about. Because unfortunately for the city, they didn't know that, what their intention to bring in additional resources from the federal level was good. They really intended to help these small businesses, but I think the unintended consequences was that it triggered budget increases, with prevailing wages and sort of all the administrative paperwork. So one lesson learned that we had after the project that the city actually implemented as part of their commercial space consultancy program was to hire a third-party prevailing wage expert who could then, partner on projects like these, who can provide and step in on the administrative level. Because then we wouldn't need to decrease the pool of contractors available. Just because a contractor is not familiar with the prevailing wage process doesn't mean we can still use them if there is that third party prevailing wage expert. So that was a huge sort of lesson learned, just collectively as a group, and one that we're happy to have played a pivotal role in.
I love that. Like I said, I did public work for a long time. I worked the first firm I worked in the industry was an architecture firm that did only schools, so everything was public. And it was a huge challenge, especially on the smaller projects, to get smaller contractors to even look at it.
Right.
Because they were so overwhelmed by all of the administrative processes and the paperwork and the prevailing wages and the reporting requirements. And they're like, we just can't. We can't be competitive. And there really wasn't, there was information. All the information was there publicly, but it was in 5,000 different places. And there was no guiding, light to help these people navigate that, which I think they've come a long way in Portland since back in the day when I was doing schools. But that's a great way to solve that problem. And I love that the city sees that. But Seattle does some pretty incredible things. I think Portland's always trying to chase Seattle. What are they doing and how can we catch up? Let's talk about the restaurants a little bit. So you've got 2 restaurants here, both with different needs, different types of service and how they serve their customers. So let's get into some design details. Let's start with CheBogz. I'm going to mess that up. Tell me about the space and some of the design features that you incorporated so we're on the Filipino restaurant right now. So for that restaurant, because they look totally different,
Right.
Completely and totally different. When I read the description, it's like, no way. Same contractor, next door to each other. No way. That's why I love to look at the pictures first so that I can be surprised by the descriptions. So let's start with that one. Tell me about what you did there.
Yeah. So whenever we sit down with our restaurant clients, we always ask them, what's your style of service? What's your anticipated seat count? And what is your equipment? Because that's kind of how we design the kitchen around any specialty furniture that they want to bring in. And so for CheBogz, we wanted to pay homage to the cuisine and the Filipino culture. I think for a lot of people, they were introduced to Filipino food because of CheBogz and their food truck. And so it's really excited that we can, create a space for them where families can gather and people aren't chasing them around the city and finding their calendars at lunchtime. So one thing that Patricia really wanted to emulate or just had this nostalgic vision around is what is called a sari-sari store. And that translates essentially to a variety market, kind of a small scale neighborhood market that a person runs out of their house sometimes or on their property. And so you can buy anything from toiletries to snacks to household goods, even gasoline sometimes. And so it's just this market that is very, you can find it all over the Philippines and just really, how would you describe it? Just very fun and bright. I mean, the food's on display, the different things are on display. And so it has this very unique aesthetic and it's, people go there on a daily basis to get their essential needs. And so, she brought us a photo and was like, I love this. This brings me home. And so what can you do to, make it real? And so for us, whenever we start designing too, we, always have a contemporary take on, different cultural elements. We don't want to represent it as is. And so we always try to play it up or have a different spin on it. And so in thinking about, fast casual, you order at a POS, a point of service station, and then you either get your food, called out or delivered to you. So that was kind of the big thing when we were designing the space. And so, just really taking inventory about the operational flow for Patricia's staff and how they really wanted to operate the business. So it's really simple. I mean, their branding, CheBogz's branding is really bright and poppy and, it's colorful. Their trucks, I think, are bright yellow or red and orange and green. And so we're we need to really figure out how to enliven the space with those colors. And so we used a Zelig tile that came in different colors. And so we created an array, a pattern that, again, is a backdrop for other things that she could put in the space. And, in all of our projects, we always ask our clients, is there anything you want to display that's special to you? Or is there any areas where you want to showcase your branding. And so she really wanted a mural done by a local artist. And so that went up, I think, after our final completion photos got taken. But, a local artist did it with imagery and graphics that relate to the Philippines, which is really awesome. And she also decorated the space like a Sari Sari store. So there's a lot of, decor, art, even the bags of chips that are on display are for sale and you can buy them. So it's really fun. And I think people get to interact with her business in that way, who are familiar with what a Sari Sari store does and had the role it plays in the neighborhood.
Okay, so Baja Bistro. I have to ask. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait till we get to Baja Bistro. Were they able to bring the drag show back?
They were. I think they've had one event since they've opened. I think they're still trying to get that program off the ground. And there's a long-time drag performer that's pretty infamous in the neighborhood that they brought back, who used to perform at their old restaurant that they've invited. And I think they're still trying to grease their wheels a little bit around their programming, and because in their new space they added a bar, and their old space was more of a wait service. It was really tiny. It was about 1,000 square feet. Now they're operating at about 2,100 square feet. So they've really expanded. And, for a small business, you have to think about capacity building, even, during the design process. And so, but yes, they have relaunched the drag performance show, and hopefully there's going to be more down the road.
I just love that. So I was like, please tell me, at some level they were able to bring that back.
Yeah.
So tell me about Baja Bistro. What kind of space were you working within, and what did you design there to accomplish the client's goals?
Yeah. So, as Sonia mentioned, it all really starts with a vision, and on the sort of more logical and rational side, how much equipment do they have or do they anticipate having? And that really kind of dictates the balance between front of house, back of house, and in Baja Bistro's case, the bar, and the sort of, how do you say, the proportions of those programs to each other. And so we really started there. The owner, Oscar Rodriguez, and his family are both from Baja California. So we knew we wanted to, in a similar way, like we do with every project, or I should say every restaurant project, is to really showcase or find an opportunity to showcase the cultural element of our clients, of our owner. And so there's a really cool tourist attraction in Baja California called the Arch of Cabo. It's a natural feature off the coast of Cabo. It's in the shape of an arch. And so we really wanted to use that as sort of a motif throughout the space, the use of an arch in Baja Bistro. And it's also something reminiscent of, Mexican architecture, or even Spanish colonial architecture. You often see the use of soft arches in architecture and design there. And so we thought it was fitting, that it both paid homage to something natural that exists in Baja California that could be reminiscent of home for Oscar, and also something often found, from a design aesthetic in Mexican and even, Spanish colonial architecture. And so we use the arches to mark entries and exits into adjacent spaces. For example, there's an arch when you go to the bathroom. There's an arch when you go from the main seating area to the bar. There's an arch from, the main seating area to the kitchen. And so how could we use that in multiple different ways, functional ways, that also balances sort of aesthetic rationale. In the bar, the arch is used as the backdrop for the liquor wall. And we did some really cool lighting techniques to really illuminate that in a very soft and glowy way. So when you're in the space, it's it sort of falls to the background, but it is a nice crown feature within the space. So we knew like with many of our projects, if you look at Hood Famous or Finn or even Raised Donuts, all these commercial tenant improvement projects always have some aspect of celebrating the story of our clients and where they come from, their background. And so we knew we wanted to do that on both Baja Bistro and CheBogz. And then additionally, to kind of round out our sort of design strategy was, the owner, Oscar, really loves art and wants to showcase Mexican art. And so he wanted a lot of white wall space for the display of art. So, through lighting strategy and finding opportunities for that, we made sure that we were being tasteful and proposing things that could really contribute to the aesthetic of the space, but also not too much where there wasn't enough wall space for the display of art and decor and things like that. So that's really kind of where we started with Baja Bistro, and we couldn't have been more happy than with how it turned out.
It looks fantastic. Hopefully I'm referencing the right project. There's like a wood ceiling feature over the bar. Is that in Baja Bistro?
Right.
Yeah, there's a soffit.
There's a soffit over the bar, just to kind of demarcate that is a special moment within the space, and that it is a space for gathering and congregating, especially within the queer community on Beacon Hill.
You accomplished that well, because that stood out for me. And oftentimes in these tenant improvements, where there's a restaurant and a tenant improvement in a building, you kind of walk into a box, and there's not always those kinds of features to kind of give it that personality and kind of highlight the bar area. So I asked about that because that was one of the first things that jumped out at me when I looked at the picture.
Right on.
So you definitely achieved what you were looking for.
Awesome.
Especially since I am not an architect, so I am user feedback.
Right. We'd love for you to visit and give us more feedback.
No, I'm getting really hungry talking. I'm going to Puerto Rico next month for a conference, and I am on a mission to find pasteles. And I've had them once in my life when I was 19 years old living in Alaska.
Oh, wow.
From a gentleman that had me and a friend over for dinner. There was a group of us, and he made them. He was from Puerto Rico. And they were the most delicious thing I ever tasted in my life. And I have never found them again anywhere around Portland. And so I'm not kidding. I would go there just to get these.
Yeah, you got to go to the source.
Yeah. So now I'm coming to Seattle. And at least it's convenient. They're right next to each other. I'll just eat at one, sit and have a few drinks for a while till I'm not as full, and then go over to the other one.
Right.
What would you say, either space or maybe both spaces as a whole, were the, say, top 2 design challenges? There's always something. You've got to fit this thing in this spot, and it's not going to work. What would you say your top 2 design challenges were on this project?
Yeah, I mean, for Patricia and the CheBogz project, coming from a food truck type of service, now moving to brick and mortar, they knew they wanted to expand their offerings of the type of food. On a food truck, it's quite limited what you can do given the amount of space. And so we were trying to balance with all the added equipment that she wanted, which therefore would dictate the sort of size of the type 1 grease hood that you would need. And if you know anything about restaurant spaces, the larger the hood, the more CFMs you need to exhaust the space. And just to kind of get a little technical, the core and shell of the building, I think, assumed a certain size hood for a restaurant that would be moving into that space. And so given all of Patricia's equipment needs, it dictated a size hood that was too large for what the existing system could accommodate. And so what we actually had to do was swap out the entire grease shaft that ran from the back of the space horizontally to the exterior of the building and then up the side of the building up to the roof. And it was enclosed in a 1-hour rated shaft. And so that was no easy task to remove all the siding, open up the shaft, tear out the existing sheet metal for the grease shaft, and put in a new one that was larger, that could accommodate the size hood that she needed. And so that was an unanticipated sort of, you can never rely solely on as-built and record drawings. You have to verify yourself. So that was something that, we had assumed that the space would be delivered to according to plan. However, it was not. And, I have some hypotheses on why that was. Maybe budget, maybe schedule. They were just trying to get it in and be done with the project, be done with the building. But nonetheless, we had to cross that bridge when it came, and there was no compromising from the client side on reducing the size hood, because that would mean reducing her overall menu. It reduced the quality of service that she was aiming for. So that was a huge priority for Patricia, was to really size the kitchen properly. And so that was an unanticipated challenge. It pushed the schedule out a little bit, just because there was discussions around the responsibility, who's going to pay for that. Is this a landlord issue? Is this a client issue? Nonetheless, working with Tim Abel, the developer, the landlord, was really gracious in taking on some of that responsibility for upgrading the grease shaft. So that was a huge challenge for us.
I bet you ask that question in every restaurant you do going forward. Let's
Right.
look at the grease shaft.
Right.
Where's the grease shaft?
Where is it? How big is it?
Is there a grease trap interceptor? Where is it?
I also worked in MEP for 6.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the minute that came out of your mouth, I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
There's no wiggle room with that, with, permitting agencies and those kinds of, you're either going to do it the way you have to do it, or you're not going to do it at all.
Right.
That was fun. Any other one you want to share?
I think, for any restaurant, really, plumbing always becomes an issue when you're tearing up the floor, finding a path to and from certain areas with plumbing. For example, in Baja Bistro, the kitchen and the bar was separated by a massive concrete stairwell for the building itself. And so there was no way to connect plumbing between the two spaces without tearing up the concrete slab significantly. And so, that while that's more sort of a more functional aspect, it is what it is kind of thing, but it did come into play with respect to the sort of finish floor that we wanted, really, because they had used a different sort of concrete mixture of the floor. The existing floor and the new floor that was poured didn't quite match, so we had to kind of think creatively around that that nuance, and we feel like we came up with a good solution. And some of the demising walls between the spaces within Baja Bistro, we were able to kind of cover up some of those differences in floor by either pushing and pulling on a wall or something like that. So very unique challenges, with respect to construction. Another thing was the GC that we had selected is more suitable for, or not more suitable. They just had more experience in residential construction, and so I would say maybe this was like their fourth or fifth restaurant that they would be working on. So there was some, discussion around things that maybe they weren't familiar with from an infrastructure perspective, plumbing, mechanical, electrical kind of stuff. Nothing out of the ordinary, but just something that always keep you on your toes, getting a contractor call, every other day on, on certain things. So just always having to kind of, be on your toes a little bit.
Were there any unique products that you used, or regular products you used in a unique way? I hear a lot of people will say, I use this thing that everybody knows what this is, but I did this with it. In either of the spaces that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, for both projects, or a lot of our client projects, budget is always the driving factor. And so we have to find ways that are visually impactful while also not breaking the bank when it comes to aesthetics and design, because a lot of the construction budget goes into MEP and structural and civil and all that stuff. And so then we get the leftovers to work on design and figure out how to make the space pretty and attractive. And so we did that with CheBogz, and as we mentioned, utilizing color. Our client was not afraid of color, and using the tile and creating an array, a pattern that is striking. I think from the pictures that we have, it is the main feature. Even the bathroom is a Zelig green, bright green tile. And so we just wanted to really, it's a simple product. I mean, I see it all over the place and people use it in various ways, but I think the way that we executed it was very on brand with Patricia and CheBogz. And we were just excited how she added the other cultural elements and decor into the space that just made it 100%. It just kind of rounded everything out. And then for Baja Bistro, as Sergio mentioned, we really played up the arched motifs. And so the arches were kind of everywhere. Even our client had to edit them down and was like, I think I don't want this many arches. I want kind of white space for art and murals. And so totally fine. We love feedback. But even the textured element in front of the bar face is kind of this arched pattern that is, about 1.5 inches of just kind of the half rounds that we use. We like to add texture. We love color when it's invited by the client. But as we mentioned earlier, the client was like, I want to leave kind of everything to the background and really utilize art as a way to add color, and the mural that they had brought in, the muralist. And we are very specific when it comes to the color of white, even on the walls, the ceiling colors, and making sure it's it hides enough of the infrastructure up there. As we budget is the driver, so it's often times that we don't get to pick floor finishes, and we just leave it raw concrete or polished and sealed. And then even the ceilings, they're often painted unless there's a feature where we want to drop a soffit, because it's just added cost. And so we're very mindful about these things. Like, obviously we'd love to, deck it out and have like strip lighting everywhere and have a drop ceiling with a cloud system. But we just really had to be mindful and be respectful about the budget and just create moments in the spaces that, Pinterest is huge inspiration for us. We get a lot of our inspo from Pinterest and Instagram. And so there's always these money shots, right, that you see when you go online. And so every time we're designing, we try to find those different, those stills, those moments where, either the client can use for their marketing as well, because we think that's really important. But also for us as designers, we like to showcase what we did and how we represented the client and their business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we got to give a shout out to this vendor we use, Surfacing Solutions. They make this really cool tambour product. It comes in all different shapes and sizes. You see it deployed in a lot of projects nowadays. But they're just a great vendor. Any questions we have, their customer service is second to none. And we've used wood tambour on a number of projects in different ways, creatively and we use it both on Baja Bistro and CheBogz in a very tasteful way. So yeah, I think that's one product in particular that we can definitely highlight and shout them out. So if you're watching this, sponsor us. No, just kidding.
Well, if that was on my list of information, they just may get tagged and see this episode anyway. But I don't know. I'm a big fan of minimalism and simplicity, and I think that oftentimes, especially in retail or restaurant types of spaces, I think they oftentimes are overdone. And I think a space feels classier and more comfortable if it's not,
Really?
Bombarding you from every area with something, there's a certain amount of taste and comfort level in walking into a space that very judiciously uses its materials to get everything you want, but not, waterboard you with it, so to speak.
Right.
I think that's because I have a very busy mind, and so the more there is, the more distracted I am by everything, and I want to go out to eat, and I want to chill, and I want to be comfortable, and so I know I although it's never fun to have a tight budget you have to work within, I almost love sometimes that forces a real thoughtful use of materials. And when there's not a lot of limitations on a budget, it almost feels sometimes like people just throw everything in but the kitchen sink.
Absolutely.
It's too much for me.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. So Beacon Hill is a pretty busy area of Seattle. Were there any challenges with permitting or staging the construction of this project? I know when you get into these core city areas, sometimes it can be a nightmare in some places. I've done a few projects in New York, in the middle of New York City, and some of the craziness they have to go through to get a project done is nuts. Did you have any challenges with permitting or staging on these projects, being in such a busy area?
I think, it was kind of a gift and a curse in a way. The projects are literally next door to the Beacon Hill Light Rail Station. So it's a heavily trafficked area. And a lot of eyes are going to be on the space just sort of naturally, and, curiosity, wondering what's going on, what's coming kind of thing. So there was all this momentum build up throughout both the design and the construction process that, we get DMs and emails from people in the community we don't even know and saying, hey, do you know, when is this opening? Like, why is there a delay kind of thing? And, you have to be intentional about your response and say, hey, we're working as hard as we can and trying to get these legacy businesses open and such. But I think being in a busy area, there's also security concerns. More eyes means more attention, means more risks involved, and having to play or just be aware of that. And both, our contractor partners and just us and our clients. And so just thinking about, security and talking through that with the contractor and making sure that access was controlled and who had keys, who had the code to the lockbox kind of thing, I think or where is the lockbox kind of thing, is always something that we're being mindful of. And, Seattle is becoming more dense. And so we're going to face these issues on more and more projects moving forward, especially as smaller, lower density properties get redeveloped into larger, more dense projects. So, but I think there was more pluses that it's near a light rail station. I think to this day, Baja Bistro doesn't even have their sign yet. They're still working on it, but people know about it because the neighborhood is small, and unfortunately, it's a rapidly changing neighborhood. Or I should say, unfortunately and fortunately, but it's a rapidly changing neighborhood. So there's always going to be curiosity about the new, latest and greatest restaurant on the block. kind of thing. So I think that helped build the buzz for our clients. It sort of almost self-promoted themselves with all the sort of construction paper on the windows and not seeing any signage or anything. So,
yeah. And the project, so it's 2 residential towers next to each other, and the front side where you enter is on Beacon Avenue, which is a very, heavily trafficked area, commercial district. But on the back side, there's exits to the alley that sits between the two structures. And so there was always issues with traffic, or just the residents or even the commercial tenants parking in the alley. And, they needed deliveries to get into the space. And so I think they got to know the property managers really well, because they were always on the phone with them, trying to clear the alley, trying to get, all the supplies and materials into the space. And that's where the grief shaft also went up on that side of the building. And so, I think it just comes with the territory. As you said, Seattle's really busy. We're in, an area that's getting rapidly developed. And so it is what it is, and our contractors deal with it. We've had to move the lockbox around a couple times because it was getting tampered with. But luckily, no break-ins.
No break-ins, no graffiti, thankfully, which has been kind of an issue here in Seattle. I don't know about Portland, but yeah, self-expression, not graffiti.
I like that. Yeah, no, we have some of the same challenges here. Same challenges in some of our older neighborhoods, and gentrification and changing landscapes, and trying to find that balance, and not having, people being pushed out of their homes. I mean, all of this, I think you see that all over the West Coast, and it's become expensive to live really anywhere on the West Coast in any of the big cities. So those are lots to think about. So you used one contractor for both projects. We all know the rubber meets the road during construction. You can design to your heart's content, but you don't really see how it all comes together till it gets built. I don't think I've ever worked on a project in my, 5 years career. I'm just joking. I'm not going to tell you how many years I've been in this business. There's always a challenge during construction. There's always some unknown condition, so we already talked about the hood. So we know about that. Okay, this was not exactly what we needed. Did anything else come up during construction that caused you to pivot or do some problem solving or change something you were doing? We also talked about the different colors of concrete. So you've kind of just fed me some of these answers.
Yeah.
Anything else that we could all learn from?
Well, I think while we did our best to kind of align the timelines, the construction schedules of both projects, inevitably, one space is larger than the other. And so at some point during construction, the timelines kind of diverged. And, CheBogz in particular, being the smaller project, finished much quicker, maybe about 4 to 6 weeks ahead of Baja Bistro. So there was a little bit of angst by Oscar and the Baja Bistro team on, hey, why is CheBogz much quicker? Why are they all done? We're just sitting here. And I think that just comes with the nature of, as you say, construction. And I think we're also still seeing some lingering effects from COVID and COVID-related lead time delays and material and labor. And so I think that just only amplifies the issues we already face on a typical construction project. And so we as designers and architects have to, be ready for those, or at least account for that in our timelines and schedules. So, those are discussions that we were having with the GC, and how can we be as efficient as possible in the construction process. Yeah. So I think that.
Mm-hmm. And related to that, there's the construction timeline, and then there's also the client's timeline of wanting to open. And so there was always this back and forth going, like, when can we open? When can we have our opening celebration, our grand and soft openings? And that was always a push and pull. between the general contractors and our clients. And then also funding, money has to get paid back at a certain time, and there's time frames around that. So we were just really mindful that, we didn't want our clients paying on a space that wasn't even open yet. And they weren't able to make any money. So we were, advocates for them in getting, as much rent abatement as possible during the construction period. And I think we started the conversation with, it really helped and the project was successful because everyone had the same vision. And so there was a lot of, just flexibility and understanding and grace that the landlords gave the clients, the general contractors gave the clients, because, everyone was good for it at the end of the day. But yeah, there was just a lot of hands in the pot.
Well, it's a testament to both of you for being able to manage that and keep people coming together and working together. On every project, we all have the same goals. We're all trying to get to this great finished project, but it doesn't always go that well. And, there's always going to be bumps in the road. That's just part of the business, but that can get really ugly really fast, or you can sit down and have some conversations and communicate and, keep everybody aligned. And I can't imagine that that's always easy to do in an environment with so many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Anything in life.
Yeah.
The more cooks you have in the kitchen, the more, challenging it's going to be to get to where you need to go. So kudos to both of you.
Thanks, Julie.
So closing questions, there's always two. One's a broad industry question, and the other one is my final question everybody gets. So, like I said, I got excited. I got to talk to you guys today after reading your bios. Your company webpage has a line that says, "A studio for people who care about culture, community, and design." Both of your bios talk about things like breaking down barriers, preserving cultural ecosystems, BIPOC membership and leaders. So I know this is a ginormous question. I don't expect you to be able to fully answer it. In your opinion, how can we do better in architecture, both in our designs of buildings and how we lead our firms in projects to better serve diverse communities and preserve our cultural ecosystems? Because it feels to me like we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
No, and we really appreciate that question because we started this practice with the intent to support small businesses and be advocates for the small business ecosystem, because a lot of our friends and families are part of that ecosystem. And we realized that, it was their first time working with a professional designer or professional services. And so we were just, in awe and honored to play a role in the growth of their businesses. But what we've learned, I think, through the past 5 years of running La Union Studio is that while, we're the experts, I guess you could say, in design, our big thing is to listen to our clients, to listen to their story about why they started and, what gets them up in the morning and why they love their product. And just the story behind them is really key to how we begin designing our spaces. And so it's really about listening first in every setting, whether it's a restaurant project, a neighborhood park, design at different levels. The first thing we do is just listen, because the communities, they have the answers. As much as we like to think we're designers and we're experts and we know what to do, lived experiences are just as valuable to help inform design solutions. So that's my contribution.
Yeah. And mine is related, but is related to both your Sonia's and yours, Cherise, about playing an integral role between us and youth. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't know about architecture as an opportunity or as a career path till college. And that's crazy, like that, you hear all the time in third grade, what do you want to be when I grow up? I want to be this, firefighter. I want to be a doctor. no one ever says architect unless their dad or their mom is an architect, right? And so, it's finding genuine partnerships and opportunities to interface with young people and show them that, hey, you too could be an architect. You too can have an impact, a direct impact on how your community grows, on how your neighborhood develops, on what cultures are reflected, and how we can manifest those stories in physical building spaces. And I think that's scalable. I think that can happen on a small, tenant improvement project like Baja Bistro and CheBogz, and I think it can also happen on large redevelopments. And I think it's the community engagement aspect and genuine curiosity for how we can reflect the values of our communities that really contribute to ensuring that that's a possibility. So that's kind of our calling and why we started Light Union Studio, and we hope to continue to be a resource for those who have never worked with an architect before.
I love that. I mean, if we really want to truly honor the cultural ecosystems of different communities authentically, not me, this white lady sitting over here deciding I know how to design in a particular community when I haven't lived that story. And you talked about listening and promoting that youth. We can't authentically do that if we don't have a very diverse community in our own profession. With those different lenses and that different input, and we're getting there.
Yeah.
But the change is so painfully slow, it drives me insane. And so, when I was reading your bios and talking about promoting that youth and getting those people to the table and giving them the opportunities and the exposure so that they know there's a table to come to. I wasn't planning to work in architecture either. This was not in my life plan. None of this. And I got a job at 20 years old as a receptionist in an architecture firm. And my listeners have heard pieces of this story before, but came from a rather difficult growing up. And I took a job to answer the phone. I didn't know what the heck I was going to do with my life. And a whole bunch of years later, I have a really, really great job, and I've learned more things than I ever thought my brain could even possibly hold. And I can teach and I can empower other people who are coming from whatever background that's a struggle, or they don't have an opportunity for that kind of exposure. And so you guys have your biggest fan right here. Just so you know that. Yeah. Final question. Everybody gets this. My world domination question. As individuals, we all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. I really, truly like to believe that. I jokingly, but not really, call that mission, my personal mission, my personal world domination statement. This is how I'm going to affect my world in the biggest way I can. So personal or professional, how do you as an individual hope to make a difference or an impact on our world? What is your personal world domination statement? Another very small question.
Yeah, I will make an impact on the world by designing and creating beautiful spaces where people can feel understood and seen.
I love that.
That's amazing.
Thanks.
And I think
we're all impressed.
Yeah, I think I touched on this also kind of at the beginning of the call, but mine I wrote, I will make an impact on the world today, or impact on the world by inspiring the next generation to make an impact in their own communities through architecture and design. And it really just speaks to empowering young people and the next generation that they can craft and mold the communities that they grew up in and frequent. And so that's just kind of my world domination statement.
Oh my God, I am in love with you too. I'm coming up there. We're all going to lunch on me at both of these restaurants.
Please do. We love that.
Come with an empty stomach.
Yes.
I will come with an empty, but keep room for cocktails.
Oh,
Yes. And I will say the food at both restaurants is fantastic. I mean, Patricia is kind of already has an infamous, following around her food and from her food truck days. And that's definitely continued into, their brick and mortar. And then Baja Bistro, they're known for their margaritas and their fish tacos. And so that's something I always get, the fish tacos. So,
Well, my lesson learned today is not to do a podcast interview on restaurants when I haven't eaten anything yet today.
lunchtime.
Because I'm like ready to hop in the car and just head up to Seattle, which I can do because I'm West Coast.
Come on, join us.
I will. Sergio and Sonia, thank you so much for joining me today. This was an absolute pleasure. I hope that you will keep me in mind as you move forward on other projects, and you've got something cool we can talk about. You are welcome in my house any day of the week.
We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Cherise. It's been a pleasure talking with you today, and we look forward to our lunch or dinner together when you come up to Seattle.